All right, this is Chapter 10, Lab A, Part 4 of the CCNA security, working with the ASA 5505 and configuring it with the command line interface. In Part 3, we configured the interfaces on the ASA device. We configured the outside interface for VLAN 2, and we configured the inside interface, VLAN 1, and we configured IP addresses for both of those interfaces and then applied them to the Ethernet 0 port for the outside and for the Ethernet 1 port on the inside. So the ASA device now has two of its interfaces configured. So if I opened up a command prompt and I ping 1.1, which is the ASA device, I get a reply. But if I try to ping any other network, for instance, if I try to ping 10.1.1.1, we're not going to get a reply. So what we need to do is we need to set up a default route on the ASA device. So that's what we're going to do right now. So what I'll do is I'll just quit out of that and I'll go back to my terminal window. Got a console connection to the ASA device right here. All right, so it's time to set up a default route. And for the default route, I need to be in global config mode, which I am already. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type route outside 0.0.0.0 space 0.0.0.0 space. So that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to use the next hop IP address for the router that we want to target. Now let's see here. Let's look at the graphic. And if this is the ASA device, the next hop router is R1 at 225 here. So that'll be 209.165.200.225. So that's what we'll put in there. So let's do that. So 209.165.200.225. All right, that looks pretty good. And so now we should have a default route out of the network. So let's do a show route. And notice I don't have to go to privileged user mode to do my show route command. And you can see that we now have two connected networks, the 209.165.200.224 network, and we have the one network here, 192.168.1.0, but we now have our static default route, candidate default, gateway of last resort, and that is to the next hop router at R1. Okay, so now that we've set up a default route, what we want to do is we want to configure NAT, or network address translation, on the ASA device. So that's what we're going to do now. Now to configure NAT on the device, what we need to do is work with network objects. So the commands we're going to put in are object, network, and then I'm going to put a space and a question mark to see the options. And you can see that it's now looking for a word. And the word that we're going to put in, and this is following along with the lab, Part 4, Lab A, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in inside dash net. And you can see that now I'm in config network object mode. And the first thing we're going to put in is the subnet that we're going to translate. So basically the inside network, which in this case is the 192.168.1.0 network. We need to put in the subnet mask. Right? Now that we have the subnet that we're going to use, we also have to now put in our NAT command. So our network address translation command is NAT, translate inside, comma, to outside. And those are both in parentheses. And then dynamic, let's take a look with a question mark to what's available here. You can see it can be a static NAT type or dynamic NAT type. And what we'll do is dynamic. So we'll say dynamic. We want basically a port address translation. And then let's look at the next one. And now use interface address as mapped IP. We can do a port address translation pool. You can see that there's a couple of options here. But what we're going to use is the interface. command. So NAT inside-outside dynamic interface. And then we can type in the keyword end, the end command, and we're back to privileged user mode. So to look at our translation, let's do a show run and look at our running config. And in the running config, let's take a look here. You can see that object, network object, inside net, and it shows the subnet that's going to be on the inside. And then if we go a little farther down, you can see that the object, network, inside net, and then here is our NAT command. Now both are shown in different places in the configuration file. The curriculum also has you do a show, run, and then specify exactly what it is in the running config you want to look at. So you can do a show run and then be specific about it and say show run object, and it'll show you the 192.168.1.0 subnet that you used. And you can do a show run and specify NAT, keyword NAT, and then it shows you the object, network inside, and the NAT portion of that command. The more commands that you can do are show NAT, show network address translation, and it shows that we have auto NAT policies, inside to outside, source dynamic, inside net interface, and then how many hits and how many untranslated hits and how many translated hits. Let's see if we can issue a ping and then see what happens. So open up our command prompt and we'll try that ping again. Now it's trying to ping across the ASA device. You see it's timing out. But even though it's timing out, what we can do is when it finishes, we'll go back and we'll run the show NAT again, and we'll also run a show translations. All right, so now we'll do the show NAT command, and you can see that there's translated hits equal to 4, but there's also untranslated hits also equal to 4. And you can see that our pings were not actually successful. Let's do the other show command related to NAT, and that is show X translation. So it's X late or X late, and for show translations, and you can see 0 in use, 1 most used. All right, hoping for some more information here. See if we can do that again. Ping. I'm going to do the ping from right here. Right, and then do the show translation. And no, not too much information. 1 in use, 28 most used. All right, I was hoping for a little more information there than I'm getting, but I'm not getting all of the information possible. Let's see if we can put in a question mark. No, okay. So that's good enough right now. For some reason, the pings are being allowed out of the ASA across the network, but they're not allowed to come back. So to explain that, what we'll do is we'll look at our running config, and we'll take a look here at basically some of the built-in stateful firewall inspection policies that are built into the ASA device in the default configuration. If you go down here, you can see that we have a class map inspection default here, and basically what we're using here is a modular policy, Cisco Modular Policy Framework, or MPF. And what it does is it allows us to set up a class map. It's basically an object-oriented policy inspection framework that's built into the ASA device. So you have a class map, policy map, and then inspection parameters. So we have policy map, global policy, class, inspection default, and then you can see the different protocols that are being inspected. And if we look at these protocols that are being inspected, what that means is when these protocols leave the network and cross the ASA device, they're being triggered for inspection so that when they come back, when those packets return, they're allowed through the firewall from the outside back through to the inside, if they're inspected. And you can see that FTP is inspected, and you can see that SIP is inspected, and TFTP, and RTSP, and all kinds of things here, but we don't have ICMP being inspected. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add that to the list. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this, but first we'll need to go to global config mode. I'm going to do a conf T to get to global config mode. And we'll say policy-map, global policy, and then class inspection underscore default. And then you can see here that we've gone from global config mode to config policy map mode to config policy map mode, and then the class inspection. So now we'll put in inspect and ICMP. So now ICMP should be inspected on the way out of the network and then allowed back through the stateful firewall. And let's see if that's actually the case. So show run just to see if that has in fact taken. All right. Inspect. ICMP is now in the list. And now if we go through and try to ping again to the outside, you can see that we get a reply. So it worked. We can also ping the next hop router. Let's see here. Ping 209, it's 225. And you can see that that's allowed back through. All right, so we modified the stateful firewall by adding inspection policy to the policy framework. And that ends part 4. And in the next part, in part 5, we're going to get to configure DHCP, AAA authentication and access control, and SSH.